My parents handed my entire future to my brother and smiled while doing it. That one sentence, that single moment. It took Emily Calloway 24 years to understand that her entire childhood had been building toward it, quietly, invisibly, the way a crack builds inside a wall, long before the wall finally falls. Emily was not the kind of woman who asked for much. She never had been. From the time she was 9 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while her brother Danny watched cartoons on the couch, she had understood not through any single conversation, but through 1,000 small silences, that in the Calloway household, effort was expected from her and excused from him. She made straight A's because anything less felt like failure. Danny made C's because Richard Calloway said boys needed time to find themselves. She won the district math competition 3 years in a row. Richard framed Danny's participation trophy from a soccer league he quit after 2 weeks. She had told herself it didn't matter. She had told herself she was building something that nobody could take away. She was wrong about that second part. The summer she turned 24, Emily drove home to Dayton, Ohio, on a Friday evening with a printed summary in her laptop bag and 4 years of straight A's behind her, and the kind of quiet, earned confidence that only comes from having actually done the work. The acceptance letter from Harrington Business School, full merit scholarship, one of only 12 awarded nationally, was saved in 3 different places on her phone because she was terrified of losing it. She needed $50,000. Not for tuition. The scholarship covered that. For everything else, the apartment deposit in Boston, living expenses, books, the cost of actually existing while she attended one of the top 12 business programs in the country. She had done the math 40 times. 50,000. That was the number. Her parents had money. Her father's contracting business, Calloway & Sons, had been profitable for 30 years. She had seen the savings account statement once, accidentally, left open on the kitchen counter. The number she saw that day had lived quietly in the back of her mind ever since, not as greed, but as the simple knowledge that the resource existed. She rehearsed the conversation the entire 4-hour drive. She was not asking for charity. She framed it as an investment, every dollar returned within 5 years, with interest if they wanted. She had prepared the 1-page summary with projected earnings data from Harrington graduates, her own academic record, and a realistic repayment timeline. She almost laughed at herself for being so thorough, so professional, even within the privacy of her own family. Almost. Dinner was quiet, the way their dinners always were. Richard watching the news, until Carol called him to the table. Danny arriving 3 minutes late with his phone in his hand, Carol moving between the kitchen and the dining room with the silent efficiency of a woman who had long ago stopped expecting anyone to help her. Emily waited. She had learned long ago that timing was everything with her father. You waited until he was comfortable. You made your case clearly and without emotion, because emotion made him shift in his chair and look at the wall. She waited until the plates were cleared. She laid the printed summary on the table. She smoothed it once with her palm. She looked at her father and began. She spoke for 4 minutes. She covered everything: the scholarship, the program ranking, the career trajectory, the repayment plan. She spoke clearly, calmly, the way she had practiced. When she finished, the table was quiet. Richard picked up the 1-page summary. He looked at it for nearly 30 seconds, long enough that Emily felt the first flutter of real hope move through her chest. Then he set it face down on the table, not to the side, face down, like something that didn't need to be seen anymore. "We already talked about this," he said. Emily's breath stopped. "Talked about what?" Carol folded her napkin. Neither parent looked at her. Danny refilled his glass of water and said nothing. "We're giving Danny the money," Richard said. "He wants to start a business. He needs capital." The words hit her so strangely that for a full 3 seconds she was certain she had misheard them. She looked at Danny. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look conflicted. He looked slightly bored, the way someone looks when a conversation is happening around them and they already know the outcome. Danny dropped 2 classes last semester, Emily said. Her voice was perfectly steady. She was proud of that later. He's figuring things out, Carol said softly to her napkin. I have a full scholarship to one of the top 12 business programs in the country. You'll find another way. Richard picked up the remote. You always do. And that was it. That was the entire conversation. Her father turned the television back on. Her mother began clearing the glasses. Danny scrolled through his phone. The printed summary lay face down on the table beside the salt shaker, like a verdict that had already been delivered before she walked through the door. Emily sat at the table for 60 more seconds. She counted them. Then she picked up the summary, folded it once, and placed it carefully inside her jacket pocket. She said goodnight. She drove to the highway. She did not cry until she hit the on-ramp, and even then, she was already done crying before she reached the city limits, because something had shifted inside her on that drive. Something deep and tectonic and permanent. And whatever it was, it didn't feel like sadness anymore. It felt like the beginning of something else entirely. She deferred enrollment. 1 year. She told herself it was strategic. She would save aggressively, apply for additional grants, find a private loan with bearable interest. She said the word deferral instead of surrender, and she said it enough times that for a while it almost felt true. She moved to Columbus and took a position at Meridian Financial Consulting, entry-level analyst, the kind of role that paid enough to survive and not enough to build anything real. She worked 10-hour days and came home to a studio apartment and opened her laptop and applied to 11 supplemental scholarships. She received 3 rejection emails and 8 permanent silences. She called her mother in October. She kept her voice careful, neutral, the way you carry a glass that's too full. Mom, do you think Dad might reconsider even a partial loan? I would sign paperwork. He could charge interest. Emily. Her mother's voice had that particular flatness, the one that meant the conversation was already over before it had started. Your father made his decision. Danny's getting his business started. It's a difficult time. How's the business going? A pause that lasted just a half second too long. He's still in the planning phase. Danny's business, as Emily could observe from the family group chat, consisted of Danny buying a new MacBook, Danny at a series of coffee shops in different cities, Danny at a weekend trip to Nashville with 4 friends, Danny posting motivational quotes about entrepreneurship on Instagram while apparently doing none of it. There was no business. There had never been any intention of a business. $50,000 was dissolving in real time into the atmosphere of a 21-year-old boy who had never once been told no by the 2 people who were supposed to love their children equally. Then February arrived and took something else from her. A junior analyst position opened at her firm, a promotion that would have changed her savings timeline completely. Better salary, better title, a genuine accelerator toward what she needed. She applied internally. Her supervisor, Patricia Holt, who had praised Emily's quarterly numbers repeatedly and once called her the most technically precise analyst on this floor, quietly encouraged her to apply. Patricia gave the role to Greg Simmons. 8 months, less tenure, lower quarterly performance numbers, no advanced degree. When Emily requested feedback, Patricia said, Greg just has a certain presence in client meetings that we felt was important for this role. Presence. Emily turned that word over in her mind for 3 days straight. She took it apart and examined every surface of it and understood exactly what it meant, and exactly what it had always meant, that she could be the most qualified person in any room and still lose to someone who simply took up more space in it. She withdrew her Harrington deferral in March. She wrote the email at 11:47 p.m. and sent it before she could reread it, because rereading it would have meant sitting with the full weight of what she was surrendering, not just the program, but the version of herself that had believed hard work and excellence were sufficient armor against a world that had already decided how much space she was allowed to occupy. She didn't call her parents to tell them. That was the night she stopped explaining herself to people who were not listening. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark studio apartment, city light falling through the blinds in pale strips across the floor, and she felt something change inside her, not loudly, not with any drama, but with the deep, permanent certainty of a door closing in a stone wall. Final, irreversible, quiet. She thought about her father's face at that dinner table, the 30 seconds he'd held her summary, the way he'd set it face down. He had not set it down because he hadn't understood what it meant. He had set it down because he had understood perfectly and chosen anyway. That distinction, once she saw it clearly, changed everything. She opened her laptop. She did not look at scholarship applications. She began to think. The anger arrived in its true form around April, and it was nothing like she had expected. She had braced for something hot and destructive, the kind of rage that sends long emails at 2 a.m. or shows up at family dinners with shaking hands and a voice that cracks at the wrong moment. Instead, it arrived cold, extraordinarily, almost beautifully cold. Like the first frost of October that you don't notice until the grass crunches under your feet and you realize the whole season has already shifted while you were looking somewhere else. It settled into her spine and stayed there, and in a way she hadn't predicted, it felt like the most honest thing she had felt in years. She did not act immediately. That was the first decision, and the most important one. She had always been a careful reader of systems. It was what had made her exceptional at financial analysis, what had earned her the praise that Patricia Holt had given and then quietly used against her. She understood that power was rarely held where it appeared to be held. She understood leverage. She understood timing. She understood that patience, applied with precision, was the most dangerous instrument available to someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to build. She began to study. Her father's contracting business, Calloway & Sons, the name itself, a detail she had never let herself examine too closely, operated on a foundation of local government contracts, Dayton municipal projects, Franklin County infrastructure bids, 2 school district renovation contracts. Richard Calloway was not a corrupt man, not in the way that word usually implies. He was a man who operated comfortably in the gray zones that small regional contractors had navigated for decades. Relationships, handshakes, the right conversation at the right golf club, with the right person at the right moment. Emily requested access to public contract databases through her firm's pro bono municipal analysis program. Completely legitimate, completely traceable, completely clean. Over 4 months, she built a picture of her father's business dealings more detailed than anything Richard himself could have articulated, because Richard operated on instinct and relationship, and Emily operated on data. She found 2 irregularities, minor at first glance, the kind of thing that slipped through because nobody was looking closely enough. Subcontractor billing discrepancies on a 2021 school renovation project. A materials cost variance on a county road contract that raised quiet questions to anyone who knew where to look. Neither was a smoking gun. Both were threads. She noted them, filed them, did not pull them yet. Patience. Always patience. She studied Danny with the same detached precision. She watched him pivot over the course of 18 months, from launching a business to exploring real estate to getting into day trading. Each pivot arriving with fresh enthusiasm on social media and concluding in conspicuous silence. Through an accidentally forwarded email chain her mother sent and immediately recalled, not knowing Emily had already read it 3 times, she learned that Danny had asked for a second loan in November, $30,000 more. She sat with the moral weight of all of it on many nights. There were evenings she talked herself out of everything entirely. Revenge was a story people told themselves when they couldn't accept that the world had simply been indifferent to them, she thought. Her parents weren't villains. They were limited, biased, small in the particular way that people who never questioned their own assumptions were small. Carol had always been gentle with her. Richard, in his own sealed and insufficient way, had never been cruel, only blind. Did blindness deserve destruction? She would fall asleep undecided. She would wake up and remember the face-down printed summary on the dinner table, and something in her chest would go very still and very clear. She was not planning destruction. She was planning something far more precise than that. She wanted them to understand fully, completely, without any comfortable distance or easy exit, exactly what they had thrown away. That was different from cruelty. The distinction mattered. She held on to it. And then she began. In January, Emily applied to Harrington again, not for reinstatement. That door was closed, and she had accepted it. She applied through the executive program's evening track designed for working professionals. Different funding structure, different timeline. She had spent 14 months saving with a discipline that bordered on punishing, cutting every non-essential expense, working 2 freelance analytical contracts on weekends, building toward a number that had once seemed impossible and now, slowly, was not. The application was the strongest she had ever written. Not because her credentials had improved dramatically, though they had, but because she was writing it now from a place of absolute clarity. No performance, no nervousness, just the clean, direct articulation of a woman who had been told she wasn't worth the investment and had decided to prove that the only opinion that had ever mattered was her own. Harrington accepted her in March. She started in September. She gave notice at Meridian the same week. Patricia Holt said she was genuinely sorry to lose her. Emily smiled, thanked her, and said nothing that wasn't true. The first thread, the subcontractor billing discrepancy she pulled in April, she did not report it herself. The cleanness of the approach was everything. Over the previous year, she had built a genuine friendship with Sandra Okafor, an analyst in the Dayton Municipal Auditor's Contracts Division. They had met at a professional women's networking event in Columbus. Real connection, real friendship, emails about Sandra's graduate thesis and Emily's coursework, and the specific exhaustion of being precise in rooms that rewarded performance over competence. When Emily mentioned, over lunch, that she had noticed something in the public contract data that seemed worth a second look, framing it as a curiosity from her graduate research, not an accusation, not a complaint. Sandra's professional instincts sharpened immediately. Emily handed her a clean analysis, cited public sources, no fingerprints of intent, completely legitimate from every angle. The audit request was filed in April. Calloway & Sons was one of 7 contractors included in a broader municipal review, not singled out, not targeted, not dramatic. Just a thread that had been pulled by someone who knew exactly where it was attached. Richard Calloway called Emily for the first time in 6 months. "Do you know anything about this audit?" His voice had an edge she had never heard in it before. Not anger exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that sounded like the first moment of uncertainty. "I've been in Boston, Dad," she said. "I'm in school." A pause. "School? I thought you—" "I found a way," she said. "I always do." She heard the silence that followed and recognized it as the first time in her life that her father had actually, genuinely stopped and listened to her. She kept her voice warm, gave him nothing to push against. The second thread was Danny, and this one required nothing from her, except restraint. She watched him lose $32,000 of her parents' money across 4 months of leveraged trading positions he did not understand. He documented the journey on social media with aggressive optimism, screenshots of green days, inspirational captions, a persona built around a success that existed only in the future tense. And then, gradually, silence. The posts stopped. The story went quiet. Emily did not intervene. She did not accelerate. She did not even feel the satisfaction she had expected to feel watching it happen. What she felt was something closer to sadness, the recognition that Danny was not a villain either. He was just a person who had been told his whole life that consequences were optional, and he had believed it completely. What she did was make one phone call. Marcus Webb, former colleague, now at a private equity firm, who had once mentioned he was building an analytical team and looking for sharp junior talent. She arranged a lunch. She sat across from him and said, "I know someone who might eventually be a fit. I want to be transparent, though." He struggled with follow-through. He'd need strong accountability structures to succeed. She had not lied once. Not once. That was the part she examined most carefully in the weeks that followed, holding it up to every light she had, looking for the place where she had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. She hadn't fabricated anything. She hadn't planted evidence or made false accusations or destroyed anyone's safety. She had only declined to protect people from the accurate consequences of their own choices. By November, the audit had concluded with financial penalties and 2 contract suspensions for Calloway and Sons. Nothing criminal, no handcuffs, no headlines. But in the world of regional contracting, where reputation was the only real currency, a crack had appeared in Richard Calloway's standing that the community could see and would not quickly forget. Danny called her crying in October. She listened to her brother's voice for a long time. His suffering was real. She could hear that clearly, and she noticed, with something like wonder, that she was not destroyed by noticing it. "You need to talk to a financial counselor," she said. "I can send you some names." She sent 3, all reputable, all legitimate. Then she sat down at her desk and returned to her coursework. Harrington's Winter Research Showcase was held on a Thursday evening in December in a glass and steel event space on the 4th floor of the Whitmore Building, overlooking the Charles River. Emily stood near the floor-to-ceiling window in a charcoal blazer, a glass of water in her hand, watching the lights of Cambridge shimmer across the dark water below. Around her, faculty and students moved in quiet clusters, voices low, the energy of the room carrying that particular charge that comes when serious people are paying close attention to each other. She had been selected to present her graduate research to a panel that included 2 senior partners from Lighthouse Advisory Group, $78 billion in managed assets, 3 offices nationally, a reputation in the industry that was built on the kind of precision she had been practicing her entire life. Her research topic, Forensic Analysis of Regional Contractor Bidding Patterns and Municipal Accountability Gaps, drawn entirely from publicly available data. She had not chosen it for irony. She had chosen it because she understood it better than anyone else in the room. The presentation ran 40 minutes. The partners asked questions for 25 more. One of them, a tall woman named Dr. Catherine Voss, silver-haired, with the kind of measured calm that came from being right most of the time, handed Emily a card at the end and said 4 words. "We will be in touch." Emily was still holding the card when her phone lit up with 3 missed calls from her mother. She stepped outside into the December cold, the river wind cutting through her blazer, and called back. Carol's voice was different. Not upset, not angry, but structurally different. The way a room sounds different after something heavy has been moved. Something load-bearing had shifted. The audit had concluded, Carol said. The penalties were significant, but the business would survive. Richard was shaken, but working through it. Danny was in counseling, financial and otherwise, and was trying, genuinely trying, in a way that felt new. Emily listened. She said the right things. She was ready to end the call. And then Carol said, "He found the folder." Emily's hand tightened on the phone. "What folder?" Carol took a breath, and she explained. Richard Calloway, during the weeks of going through business documents for the audit response, had apparently spent several evenings in his office reviewing old files. And somewhere in that process, Carol's voice broke slightly here, just once, and then steadied. He had come across a folder he had been keeping for years. A private folder, never mentioned, never shown to anyone. Inside it was every academic award notification Emily had ever received. Every newspaper clipping from her district math competition wins. Every scholarship announcement, every honor society induction letter, every dean's list certificate printed, dated, and filed in chronological order going back to her freshman year of high school. 15 years of documentation in a filing cabinet, in silence. "He never told you," Carol said. "You know how he is. He didn't know how to say it. But he kept every single one, Emily. Every single one." The December wind moved off the river, and Emily stood very still on the sidewalk outside the Whitmore building, the lights of Cambridge blurring slightly at the edges, and felt something happen inside her chest that no part of her plan had ever prepared her for. Her father, the man who had set her printed summary face down on the dinner table, who had handed $50,000 to a son who lost it and turned his back on a daughter who would have built a legacy with it, had been watching her in complete silence her entire life, had been proud in the only language he apparently knew how to speak, private, secret, contained behind a wall he had never learned to open. He had always known what she was worth. He had known and failed her anyway. She stood with that truth for a long time, not 60 seconds longer, long enough for 2 students to walk past her, and for the river wind to shift direction, and for the card in her hand to become soft at the edges from the pressure of her grip. Was it better or worse knowing that? Was it forgiveness that she felt moving through her? Or something more complicated? Some compound of grief and fury and understanding that revenge had no instruction manual for, that justice had no clean resolution for. Because the man who had hurt her most had also, quietly and uselessly, loved her most? She didn't know. She was not sure she was supposed to know yet. She looked at Dr. Catherine Voss's business card. She looked at the river. She thought about the folder in the filing cabinet in Dayton. She thought about 15 years of silently clipped achievements, documented by a man who expressed pride the way some people hold their breath underwater for as long as possible, until it kills them. She thought about Emily Calloway, 9 years old at the kitchen table, doing homework while her brother watched television, understanding without words that she would have to build everything herself. She had every single piece of it, the education, the patience, the precision, the quiet, devastating competence of simply becoming exactly what they had bet against. She had done it without their money, without their belief, without their help, and without ever becoming the version of herself that their failure could have made her, bitter, small, defined entirely by what had been done to her. She pulled out her phone. She looked at her father's name in her contacts for a long moment. She did not call him. Not tonight. Maybe not for a while. Forgiveness, she understood now, was not a door you opened once. It was a door you had to choose to walk toward, slowly, on your own timeline, and only when you were ready. But she saved the card. She put it in her jacket pocket, next to her phone, next to the woman she had built from the ruins of the woman they had tried to bury. She walked back inside. She picked up her water glass. She looked at the river one more time, dark and cold, and moving steadily forward, indifferent to everything behind it. They gave your future to someone else, and in doing so, they gave you something they never intended to. The only kind of strength that cannot be handed to you, because it can only be forged in the fire of being left with nothing. And nothing, it turns out, was always enough.